Governments make it seem like they're constantly working for your financial freedom. They talk about stability, growth, and opportunities all the time. But if you take a closer look at history, you'll see the truth is much darker. Because governments have never hesitated to play secret financial games to amass wealth and power for themselves, all while keeping ordinary people poor. And the truly shocking part? These games aren't new. These games have been replayed for centuries. New names, fresh packaging, but the aim is always the same: push wealth upward and keep the majority dependent. Now let's look at the oldest, simplest trick: inflation. When a government spends more than it can raise in taxes, it has two choices: either admit the truth and openly tax citizens, which is politically risky, or quietly devalue its currency, meaning it lowers the worth of every coin and banknote in circulation, as is happening in Turkey right now. Ancient Rome played this game masterfully. In the 3rd century AD, faced with rising military expenses, emperors began reducing the silver content in the denarius. Once nearly pure silver coins, they eventually became copper coins, coated with a thin layer of silver. The empire acted as if nothing had changed, but everyone holding those coins paid the price. Inflation skyrocketed, savings vanished, and wages fell short. It was a silent tax on the people. Only today, instead of imperial mints, central banks carry it out. The Middle Ages brought another version of this game: forced debts. In England, France, and Spain, kings constantly pressured wealthy merchants and guilds to lend money to the throne. Of course, this voluntary debt wasn't really optional. Refusing could mean fines, seizure of property, or worse. Sometimes the crown promised repayment with interest, but the payment would either be late, made in devalued currency, or never come at all. This left merchants no choice but to hand over their capital, while the government continued funding wars and palaces. The trick here was coercion hidden behind a mask of patriotism or duty, and this method worked for centuries. The trick here was this: coercion disguised as patriotism or duty, and this method worked smoothly for centuries. By the 17th century, the game changed. The financial system itself became the trick. In 1694, Britain established the Bank of England, not out of charity, but because it urgently needed money to fight France. Wealthy investors bought government-issued bonds, and in return, the crown guaranteed regular interest payments. Of course, these payments were funded by the taxes paid by the public. Think about it. Who actually pays these taxes? Ordinary citizens, carrying the burden through taxes on salt, beer, and cloth. So while the rich made risk-free profits, the cost always fell on the people. The poor were forced to pay higher taxes to shoulder the burden of these interest payments. In reality, this was a wealth transfer system carried out under the name of national finance, and it laid the foundations of the system that still persists today. So what's the safest investment in the world? Lending to the government. But remember, these profits are ultimately guaranteed by the labor and consumption of the people. Fast forward to today, and these tricks are everywhere. Take budget deficit spending, for example. Governments accumulate massive debts, and these debts are bought by investors, banks, and foreign states. Politicians tell the public that this is for infrastructure, jobs, or social programs. But the truth is, most of the money flows into defense contracts, corporate bailouts, and rescue packages. When it's time to pay back, governments don't go straight to cutting expenses. Instead, they raise taxes, erode money through inflation, or slash social benefits. Here's the game. Debt looks like it's for the people, but while the burden falls on their shoulders, the profits go to bondholders. Then the rescue packages kick in. During the 2008 financial crisis, banks made reckless, risky investments, turned toxic mortgages into securities, and nearly collapsed the entire global economy. So who paid this cost? Ordinary taxpayers through massive government bailouts. And who profited? The very same banks which emerged from the crisis bigger and stronger. The trick was simple. Profits went to the private sector, losses were dumped on the public, and the people were told it was necessary to save the system. Even the way governments manage pensions and salary systems is, in itself, a deception. For decades, people in the United States, Britain, and Europe have been putting money into government-managed pension funds, believing it would be there when they retired. But most of the time, governments don't actually set the money aside. They spend it immediately and leave behind only an IOU. The promise is, when the bill comes due, future taxpayers will cover the cost. In other words, this system is essentially an intergenerational Ponzi scheme, dressed up in official language. It works until demographics shift, the population begins to age, and the retirement burden grows. Then suddenly, it becomes unsustainable. Then the government reforms the system, usually by cutting benefits, raising the retirement age, or reducing the real value of payments through inflation. Do you see the pattern? At every stage, the trick relies on perception. The public is told inflation equals growth, forced debts equals duty, national debt equals investment, bailouts equals stability, pension cuts equals reform. The language hides the truth. Wealth is being transferred from the many to the few, from the lower classes to the upper classes. And history shows that this trick has worked for centuries. Because most people don't study economic history, don't understand financial systems, and realize the trap far too late. In recent years, these games have become even more complex. Take the concept of quantitative easing, for example. Most people hadn't even heard the term before the 2008 financial crisis. Central banks created trillions of dollars out of thin air in a short time, buying government bonds and mortgage-backed securities to try to stabilize the markets. Politicians and bankers told the public it was necessary to prevent a collapse, and this method proved effective for the financial system. Asset prices rose, stocks, real estate, and bonds gained value. But who owns most of these assets? The wealthy. For an average household without large investments, gains were nearly zero, while the costs, distorted markets and rising living expenses, were piled on their shoulders. The trick was this: money creation saved the system for those at the top, while simultaneously saddling the entire society with inflation and inequality. Another deception in the modern world is stealth taxation. Instead of raising income taxes directly, governments quietly tax through sales taxes, fuel taxes, and most of all, inflation. When prices rise faster than wages, the difference acts as a hidden tax on savings and purchasing power. Governments love inflation because it reduces the real value of their debts. But for citizens, it means the erosion of financial freedom. On paper, your salary may appear higher, making you feel wealthier. But if your expenses outpace your earnings, you're actually losing wealth. This isn't a flaw in the system. This is the system itself. Inflation isn't just an accident in the economy. It's one of the most consistent tricks governments use to pass the cost of their spending onto you without you noticing. Then there's regulatory capture. On the surface, regulations exist to protect the public: financial rules, safety standards, consumer rights. But history has repeatedly shown that powerful industries find ways to influence their own regulators. In the 19th century, it was railroad companies. In the 20th century, oil companies. And today, tech and finance sectors have shaped the rules in their favor. It's the same dynamic Peaky Blinders learned on the streets of Birmingham. Rather than playing the game, it's more profitable to control the referee. Governments present regulations as protective tools, but behind the scenes, the biggest companies create loopholes that limit competition and guarantee profit flows. The public sees protection, insiders see profit. War financing is just an old trick dressed in new clothes. During World War I and World War II, governments issued massive amounts of bonds, presenting their purchase to the public as a patriotic duty. Citizens believed they were supporting their country, and in a sense they were. But these bonds also became risk-free, profitable investments backed by future taxes. The winners were the wealthy. In the 21st century, nothing has changed. Trillions spent on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were financed through debt in favor of defense contractors, banks, and bondholders. Ordinary taxpayers footed the bill. The trick is this: wars are always presented as temporary emergencies. Yet the financial burdens can persist for generations, long after the soldiers return home. Governments even use complexity as a financial trick. Tax codes thousands of pages long, financial instruments that even professionals struggle to explain, budgets full of hidden line items and jargon. All of this creates an environment where ordinary citizens can't track how money flows. Complexity becomes camouflage. If you can't see the wealth transfer, you can't resist it. In ancient Rome, devaluing money was a visible sign of the trick. Today, the same deception is hidden among balance sheets full of abbreviations and secret programs. But the game is the same. Make the system so complex that the public can't follow it, and let wealth transfer continue unnoticed. Why does this matter now? Because these games are still going on, and accelerating. Inflation is eroding your savings, debt burdens grow every year, and when markets shake, bailouts still kick in as the first reflex. Central banks continue to control and steer the money supply. Meanwhile, governments pass costs onto the public in such indirect ways that most people don't fully grasp what's happening. The result is a system that makes you work harder for less real wealth, while financial elites keep growing stronger. History shows us not only that these games exist, but that they always repeat. When Rome devalued its coins, citizens suffered. When kings imposed forced debts, merchants lost their wealth. When modern states pursue fiscal policy through inflation and debt, households bear the burden. Different eras, the same mechanism. And here's the harsh truth. Most people never escape these tricks because they don't realize they're part of the game. They see inflation as natural, taxes as inevitable, and bailouts as acts of mercy. Instead of studying economic history, they choose to believe what governments tell them. And this ignorance is the foundation of the most powerful deceptions. When people forget the past, they can't recognize its repeat. That's why governments and the wealthy prefer a financially uneducated public. Financial education is resilience. Economic history is a powerful weapon. If you understand how the games work, it becomes much harder for them to manipulate you. So, what should you take away from this? First, always look beyond the headlines. When government stimulus packages are announced, ask who benefits first. When inflation rises, remember it's not just bad luck. It could be a political choice. When new regulations are introduced, question who wrote them and who stands to gain. Second, build real wealth away from the system's traps. Own assets that retain value, even if the currency loses worth. Third, never assume the system works for you just because you've been told it does. Systems exist to protect themselves, not your wealth. History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but if you ignore its lessons, it can crush you in much the same way. The financial games that impoverished Roman citizens are the same tactics that drain your bank account today, just packaged in modern language. The difference lies in whether you spot the game in time. This is History of Fortune, where the numbers tell human stories and the story always leads back to us. Take care of yourself and see you in the next videos. Goodbye.